We'll be drawing this group of buildings in Edinburgh. The important thing with buildings is to choose a spot to start which we can reference from. You can see here my preferred method of referencing perspective lines. We don't need to understand vanishing points and plot things that are probably off our paper. As long as we can observe the lines carefully and have a way of drawing the angles accurately. And using my pen as a measuring stick works very well for me. And then it's a case of starting. I keep my lines nice and loose because that gives me a little flexibility in correction. I don't want an exact, perfectly straight, perfect angle drawing because then any mistakes show up really clearly. If everything has a slightly loose feel to it, then there's a little room for error, which I think works well. Because drawing freehand means there are no measurements, there are no rulers, there is no pencil. I'm just looking at my reference, whether it's a photo or straight ahead, and I'm drawing it directly with ink. So it can be a bit scary, but it's also very liberating because it just forces us to start drawing and not to be too concerned about things that aren't quite in the right place, because there's nothing we can do. The important thing is to push on and not to stop and feel like we have to start again if a line's not in the right place. A mistake will never look as bad as when you've just made it, particularly if it's at the start of the drawing. So I'm measuring more lines. Now that I've drawn a few windows and I have some shapes, I can start to measure off what I've already drawn. So we'll keep progressing this in the same way, measuring off what I've already drawn, being very careful to align things, especially where we have windows. It's really important to get the alignments correct and to get the perspective lines correct horizontally across our wall. There's probably nothing more important than those perspective lines of the rows of windows where they line up on the horizontal. Other things won't stand out, but that will. I'm concentrating on this central section now. I'm going to leave those little towers on the roof, and I'm also going to leave the details at street level where things overlap a lot more. I want to get this central part of the building done because then I can use it to reference where the various street components go. Before I started drawing, I made the decision to slide this street light to the left. I didn't like the fact that it was in the center. I know it's going to look more prominent when I actually draw it than it looks in this photo. And I also didn't want it coming over the top of the windows as it does. But it means I'm also going to have to check the perspective lines to make sure that I get it in the right location. It's important not to leave these things out simply because we think they're too hard or we're scared of drawing them. But as an artist, it's perfectly legitimate to make changes that will improve our artwork because people aren't going to be comparing it with our reference photo. They'll only be seeing our artwork. So now I keep doing these windows. They don't all line up, and that's an important detail to notice. It's very important to observe our reference carefully and not to presume that just because most windows line up exactly in buildings, that the particular ones we're drawing at this point do as well. You can see me there just working out the perspective for how high this lamppost goes, and I'm much happier with having it there, and it adds a bit of interest to a bit of an empty space in the drawing. And now again I'm measuring angles as I start to wrap around the side and connect this central building with the overlapping section of a closer building that we're just going to have the corner of. And compositionally that's good because it adds interest that's closer up. It lets us draw on a slightly different scale. You'll notice that at this point I'm not worrying about trying to represent the stonework at all. I'm treating the walls as all smooth surfaces. I shift now to doing all of the rooftop elements of the drawing because I have all the lower portions done that I can use to reference. So I do this chimney first on the right. It's going to cast a shadow on the building, so I want to make sure I get the details nicely positioned. Then I have these two turret towers in the center. I find the most important thing is to carefully plot where the top of the tower is going to be, whether it's a little tower like this or a tall church spire. Carefully get the top of it so it's not too squat and it's equally not too tall. And then get a good center line. What is directly under the center of the top of the tower of the spire? Work out that point accurately and the rest of it should fall into place. And keep the sides in perspective. Draw the most prominent things first, most carefully, and then fit the other things in around them that are less prominent. If the proportions aren't correct, the main things are done properly. With the rooftop elements done, I move to the lower parts of the drawing. I always draw first the closest things that overlap other things behind them. So I draw these bollards in the road, and then I also draw the concrete bollards across the entranceway of the laneway. And then I do the cars behind them. I don't particularly like drawing vehicles. I'm not very good at it, but I feel like they're an important part of most streetscapes, and they also give a sense of scale to this drawing. Because there are no people walking through, it adds a more human element and certainly scale to the buildings, and therefore helps us to understand them better. This fence along the lower right is quite detailed. I don't use a ruler. It doesn't have to be exact, and really I'm drawing the shadows, not the planks of wood. We don't have to draw the objects. We can often draw the spaces between objects, and that often means drawing the shadows, which is usually for me less intimidating a subject to draw. And so I create the effect of the fence rather than an exactness of it. So now I can quickly complete the rest of the foreground elements of the scene. With the buildings basically drawn, I now want to suggest the stonework because it is a very important visual component of this scene. But I don't want to get bogged down drawing all the stonework. Besides the time it will take, visually it will overwhelm the line work in more important architectural elements such as the walls and the roofs and the windows. So what I want to do is draw just enough that the brain will get a sense that these are walls made up of small stone blocks, and will presume for us, without us having to draw it, that all the walls are made of this same formation. It's very important with the line work that I keep the perspective lines. So there's just a few more lines to suggest stonework, and then I move on to tone. I don't feel the need to put tone on every drawing, and often I would use hatching with my fine liner to indicate shadows and shade. But the very strong contrast of the late afternoon sun against the brilliant stonework is part of this scene. It was late afternoon on the longest day of the year in Edinburgh. So the shadows are high contrast, and I use my N4 to do that. I use an N2 just for a few areas where there are lighter shades within the shadows, such as the vehicles and some of the window frames. And besides that, it's just some of the N4 for under the gutters and the eaves and under the tops of some of the windows. But there's really not very much shadow to use at all. And then I also decide to add some tone to the roofs, just to show there's a difference in the local colour. So it's nothing to do with shade or shadow, but just the fact that the slate is a darker colour than the walls. And so I do all of that and add a little more local colour to the towers, and my drawing is done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Freehand drawing is a great activity to try. Drawing directly with ink and not using any rulers or any other devices to help in accuracy brings a certain challenge, but it also brings a great freedom just to jump in and have a go. I find it stops me becoming too precious, and it's helped me develop a looser style than I first had. And I find that incredibly satisfying. It's taught me how to deal with not being perfect in my drawing all the time. It's taught me how to make the most of the odd line that's not in the right place. And it's also taught me that at the end of the drawing, it's the overall effect which is going to matter, not what each individual line is doing or not doing. So I hope this video has encouraged you to jump in with your pen and a reference and just draw and not worry about making a mistake. I don't want to be careless, but I do want to learn to be free in my drawing and my line work. So, however you draw, have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.